The moment I saw my dead brother's name on a paycheck, everything changed. I stared at the computer screen, blinking hard, thinking maybe the fluorescent lights were playing tricks on my eyes. But no, there it was, clear as day in our payroll system. Luis Reyes, $3,847.62, direct deposit processed. My hands started shaking. Luis had been dead for 3 years. I sat frozen in my cramped cubicle at Redwood Logistics, the afternoon sun casting shadows across the endless spreadsheets that had become my life. Around me, the accounting floor hummed with its usual chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people complaining about lunch orders. Normal sounds for a normal Tuesday in Chicago. But nothing about this was normal. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 34 years old, and I've been a payroll analyst at this company for nearly 12 years. I'm the guy who makes sure everyone gets paid on time, who catches the decimal point errors, who stays late to fix the problems nobody else wants to deal with. I'm invisible until something goes wrong, then suddenly everyone remembers my name. And right now, staring at my brother's ghost in our computer system, I knew something was very, very wrong. Luis had died in a car accident on a rainy Thursday evening in March 2021. He was 28, worked construction, had just gotten engaged to his girlfriend Sophia. The funeral was small, just family, a few co-workers, and the weight of dreams that would never happen. We buried him at Graceland Cemetery on the north side, under a headstone that simply read beloved son and brother. So why was Redwood Logistics cutting him a paycheck in 2024? I clicked deeper into the system, my heart pounding like a trapped bird. Luis Reyes wasn't just getting one paycheck, he'd been employed for 8 months. Department, Warehouse Operations. Supervisor, Martin Caldwell. Martin. Of course it was Martin. Martin Caldwell strutted through our office like he owned the building, which, given his relationship with upper management, he might as well have. He was the kind of guy who wore expensive suits to a logistics company, who talked about synergy and paradigm shifts in meetings about shipping rates. The executives loved him because he made them feel innovative, like they were running a tech startup instead of a trucking company. I'd watched Martin climb the corporate ladder for 4 years, stepping on whoever was convenient. He had that dangerous combination of confidence and carelessness that gets mistaken for leadership. While I worked 60-hour weeks making sure payroll ran smoothly, Martin spent his time in glass conference rooms drawing charts that meant nothing and taking credit for other people's work. But this, using my brother's name, this was different. This was personal. I printed the payroll record, my hands trembling as the paper slid out of the machine. There was something obscene about seeing Luis's name printed in corporate fonts, reduced to employee ID number 4471, as if he were just another cog in Martin's machine instead of the brother who used to sneak me extra Halloween candy when we were kids. I should have stormed into Martin's office right then. Should have demanded answers. Should have called the police. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do over 12 years of being overlooked. I stayed quiet and started watching. Because here's what Martin didn't know about me, what nobody at Redwood knew about me. I might have been invisible, but invisible people see everything. And I was very, very good at seeing. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the payroll record. My apartment was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. On the shelf across from me sat a framed photo of Luis and me at a Cubs game, both grinning like idiots, beer foam on our lips. "I'm going to find out what he's doing to you," I whispered to the photo. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The accounting floor was empty except for the cleaning crew finishing up. I had 2 hours before anyone else would arrive, 2 hours to dig deeper into our payroll system without curious eyes watching over my shoulder. What I found made my stomach turn. Luis wasn't the only ghost on our payroll. There were 12 others, all with Hispanic surnames, all supposedly working in warehouse operations under Martin's supervision. Miguel Santos, $3,200. Elena Vasquez, $2,890. Carlos Hernandez, $4,100. The amounts varied, but they all had one thing in common: they were all dead. I cross-referenced the names with public records. Obituaries from the Tribune. Death certificates filed with Cook County. Some had died years ago, others more recently. But all of them were now apparently loyal Redwood employees earning steady paychecks that disappeared into bank accounts I couldn't trace. Martin wasn't just committing fraud. He was running a graveyard operation, using dead people's identities to funnel money out of the company. And somehow, he'd gotten access to enough personal information to make it look legitimate. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Mijo, don't forget dinner Sunday. I'm making Luis's favorite enchiladas." The timing felt like a punch to the chest. Mom still made Luis's favorite foods on the anniversary of his accident, still set a place for him at family gatherings. If she knew some corporate parasite was using his name to steal money, I deleted the text and got back to work. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own office. I'd arrive early, stay late, and use every spare moment to trace the web of fake employees. The deeper I dug, the more sophisticated Martin's scheme became. He'd created entire departments of ghost workers, night shift supervisors who didn't exist, overtime claims for people who'd been dead for years. He'd even filed workers' compensation claims for fake injuries, collecting payouts that went straight into accounts he controlled. The amounts were staggering. Over 18 months, Martin had stolen nearly $400,000 from Redwood using dead people's identities. He was so confident in his system that he'd gotten sloppy, authorizing payments with his own digital signature, routing money through accounts that traced directly back to his personal finances. But here's what made it even worse. Martin wasn't just stealing from the company. He was stealing from the families of the dead. Every paycheck cut in Luis's name was money that could have gone to raises for actual employees, to better benefits, to supporting the people who actually showed up to work every day. During team meetings, I watched Martin present his cost-saving initiatives with that trademark smirk. He'd eliminated redundant positions, he claimed. Streamlined operations. Increased efficiency. The executives ate it up, praising his innovative approach to workforce management. If they only knew he was managing a workforce of corpses. "Reyes," Martin called out during one particularly sickening presentation. "You handle payroll. Tell them how smooth our processing has been lately." I looked up from my notepad, met his eyes, and smiled. The same calm smile I'd perfected over years of corporate survival. "Very smooth, Mr. Caldwell. No issues at all." His grin widened, completely missing the ice in my voice. He thought I was just another sheep, too scared to question authority. He had no idea I was building a case that would destroy him. That Friday afternoon, while Martin was off playing golf with potential clients, I made copies of everything. Payroll records, bank routing information, signature authorizations. I built a timeline showing exactly when each ghost employee had been hired and how their paychecks were processed. I was careful to only use information I legitimately had access to as part of my job. No hacking, no breaking into files I wasn't supposed to see. Just careful documentation of what was already in front of me. But I needed more than evidence. I needed leverage. That's when I remembered something from my first week at Redwood, back when I was young and eager and thought loyalty mattered more than politics. During the orientation, they'd explained that all payroll authorizations required dual approval, one from the department head and one from a certified payroll administrator. I'd been certified for 11 years. And according to our system, my authorization code was still active on every single transaction. Which meant legally, I'd approved every fake paycheck. Every fraudulent payment. Every theft that carried my brother's name. But I'd never actually approved anything. Martin had been forging my authorization, using my codes without my knowledge. That wasn't just fraud anymore, it was identity theft. And it made me the perfect witness to his crimes. Monday morning, I walked into the office with a plan. Martin was holding court by the coffee machine, regaling a group of junior analysts with stories about his weekend at some charity gala. He wore a new watch, a Rolex that probably cost more than most of our employees made in 6 months. The kind of watch you buy when stolen money burns holes in your pockets. "Morning, Reyes," he said as I passed, not bothering to look up from his audience. "Make sure you process those new hire packets this week. We're expanding the night crew." I nodded politely and kept walking. But I knew there were no new hire packets. There was never any new hire packets. Just more dead names for Martin to exploit. At my desk, I opened my secure email and began typing a message to Redwood's compliance department. Not a rant, not an accusation. Just a formal request for an audit of payroll discrepancies I'd identified during routine processing. I attached my documentation, clean, professional, devastating. Then I sent copies to our external auditors, the Department of Labor, and the Cook County District Attorney's Office. Not because I wanted to destroy the company, but because some lines can't be uncrossed. 2 hours later, my phone rang. "Daniel, this is Patricia Gonzalez from Legal. Could you step into conference room C immediately?" The tone in her voice told me everything. They'd received my email. Conference room C was the small one, usually reserved for HR meetings and uncomfortable conversations. When I arrived, Patricia sat across from two men I didn't recognize, both wearing the kind of serious expressions that government investigators perfect over years of practice. "Daniel," Patricia began carefully, "these gentlemen are from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They'd like to ask you some questions about payroll irregularities." My heart hammered, but I kept my voice steady. "Of course. How can I help?" Agent Morrison, tall and thin with prematurely gray hair, opened a folder. "We understand you've identified some concerning patterns in employee compensation records." "Yes, sir. Dead people receiving paychecks, among other issues." Agent Chen, younger but with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything, leaned forward. "How long have you been aware of these discrepancies?" "I first noticed them last Tuesday. Started investigating on my own time to make sure I wasn't mistaken." They exchanged glances. Morrison pulled out a printout, my brother's fake employment record. "This Luis Reyes. What's your relationship to him?" My throat tightened. "He was my brother. Died 3 years ago in a car accident." The room went silent. Even Patricia looked shaken. "And you're certain he never worked for Redwood Logistics?" Chen asked gently. "He was a construction worker. Never set foot in this building." I paused, then added, "Using his name like this, it's not just theft. It's desecration." Morrison nodded grimly. "We'll need your full cooperation, Mr. Reyes. This investigation is going to move quickly." As they explained the process, interviews, document reviews, potential testimony, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Relief. Finally, someone was listening. The next few days felt like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. FBI agents set up in conference room A, interviewing employees one by one. Accountants from the Department of Labor combed through our financial records. Martin's swagger evaporated as lawyers in expensive suits huddled with the executives behind closed doors. He tried to maintain his normal routine at first. Still showed up in his tailored suits, still held court in the break room. But his stories had lost their punch. His jokes fell flat. And when he thought no one was looking, his hands shook slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. Wednesday morning, I was processing legitimate payroll when Martin appeared at my cubicle. His usual confidence had cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. "Reyes," he said, voice low. "We need to talk." I looked up slowly. "About what?" He glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "Look, I know you think you found something. But you're misunderstanding the situation. Those accounts, they're part of a complex restructuring initiative. Above your pay grade." "Restructuring," I repeated flatly. "Temporary funding mechanisms. Shell companies for tax optimization. It's all legal, just complicated." His words tumbled out faster, desperation bleeding through. "If you cooperate, keep quiet about the technical details you don't understand, I can make sure you're taken care of. Promotion, raise, whatever you want." I saved my spreadsheet and turned to face him fully. "Martin, are you offering me a bribe?" His face flushed red. "I'm offering you perspective. Don't be stupid, Reyes. You've been invisible for 12 years. Do you really want to risk that stability over some paperwork confusion?" "Paperwork confusion." I stood up slowly. "Is that what you call using my dead brother's identity to steal money?" The color drained from his face. Other employees had started glancing our way, sensing the tension. Martin forced a laugh, but it came out strangled. "You're being dramatic. It's just data entry errors. Data entry errors with direct deposits. He couldn't answer that. Instead, he straightened his expensive tie and tried to summon his old authority. This conversation is over. Get back to work. But as he walked away, I noticed his hands were trembling. The golden boy was finally afraid. That afternoon, Agent Morrison called me into conference room C again. This time, his expression was grim. Daniel, we've traced the accounts. The money wasn't just going to Martin Caldwell personally. He was funneling it through multiple shell companies, then using those companies to make loans to himself and several associates. How much total? Conservative estimate. Just over $800,000 across 2 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. $800,000. Enough to buy homes, start businesses, change lives. Instead, it had been stolen using the names of people who couldn't defend themselves. There's more, Chen added. We found evidence he was selling the payroll information to other companies. Identity data for deceased individuals is valuable on the black market for exactly this kind of fraud. My stomach churned. It wasn't just theft, it was systematic exploitation of the dead. Martin had turned grief into profit. Thursday morning brought the final act. I was at my desk early, as usual, when the elevators opened and a group of people in dark suits stepped out. Not FBI this time, these moved with the crisp efficiency of federal prosecutors. Behind them, 2 Cook County sheriffs. The office went silent as they crossed the floor toward Martin's corner office. Through the glass walls, I watched Martin look up from his computer, his face cycling through confusion, then recognition, then pure terror. The lead prosecutor knocked once, then entered without waiting for permission. The conversation was brief, less than 5 minutes. When they emerged, Martin was in handcuffs. As they walked him toward the elevators, he caught my eye across the office floor. His expression wasn't angry or defiant. It was something worse, the hollow look of a man who'd finally run out of lies. The elevator doors closed, and Martin Caldwell was gone. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Friday afternoon, Patricia from legal called me into the CEO's office. James Morrison, not the FBI agent, the company president, sat behind his massive desk, looking older than his 50-something years. The past week had carved new lines around his eyes. Daniel, he began slowly, I want to personally apologize for what you've endured. Using your brother's identity was unconscionable, and it happened on my watch. I nodded but didn't speak. Apologies were cheap. I wanted to see what came next. We're implementing new oversight procedures, he continued. Dual authorization for all payroll changes, mandatory quarterly audits, external compliance reviews. And we'd like you to head the new Financial Integrity Department. The offer hung in the air between us. A promotion, a corner office, probably double my current salary. Everything Martin had dangled as a bribe, now offered legitimately. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But I need to ask, how did Martin get access to my authorization codes? Morrison shifted uncomfortably. We're still investigating. It appears he had administrative access he shouldn't have had, granted by previous management without proper oversight. Previous management. My predecessor approved Martin's access levels when he was first promoted. I inherited those arrangements and didn't question them thoroughly enough. Translation: Morrison had been complicit through negligence, too impressed by Martin's charm to examine what he was actually doing. The realization must have been eating at him. The FBI estimates that Martin's activities cost the company nearly $1 million, Morrison continued. Money stolen from operations, from employee benefits, from expansion plans that would have created real jobs for real people. I thought about the warehouse workers who'd been laid off 6 months earlier, told the company couldn't afford to keep them. While Martin was cutting fake paychecks for dead people, living employees were losing their livelihoods. I'll take the position, I said. But I want full authority to audit any department, any executive, any transaction. No exceptions. Morrison nodded quickly. Done. Whatever you need. As I left his office, I passed the cubicle where Martin used to hold his morning coffee court. A facilities worker was boxing up his belongings, expensive pens, a crystal paperweight, a photo of him shaking hands with some politician. In the box, partially hidden under a stack of business cards, I spotted something that made me pause, a printout of Lewis's employment record, marked up with handwritten notes in Martin's precise script. He'd been studying my brother's information, memorizing details from his obituary to make the fake employment seem more believable. Birth date, last known address, social security number. Martin had turned my family's grief into a research project. I couldn't help myself. I pulled out my phone and called my mom. "Miho," she answered, her voice warm with surprise. "You never call during work hours. Everything okay?" "Yeah, Mom. Everything's going to be okay. I just wanted to tell you, Lewis's name is clean again." She didn't understand, and I couldn't explain. Not yet. But someday, when the trials were over and Martin was serving whatever sentence he deserved, I'd tell her the whole story. How her son's memory had been violated and then vindicated. How justice sometimes comes quietly, through spreadsheets and audit trails instead of dramatic confrontations. For now, it was enough that Lewis's name would never appear on another fraudulent paycheck. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, corner windows, actual walls, a door I could close when I needed to think. The Financial Integrity Department had grown to 4 full-time auditors and had already identified 3 other schemes running in different divisions. Martin was serving 18 months in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. 3 other executives had been forced to resign when our audits revealed they'd ignored obvious red flags to protect their golden boy. But the victory that mattered most wasn't Martin's downfall or my promotion. It was the letter I'd received from Sophia, Lewis's former fiancée. Someone had told her about the case, how her deceased partner's identity had been stolen and then recovered. She wrote, "Daniel, I don't understand all the legal stuff, but the lawyer said Lewis's name was cleared of any wrongdoing. That means everything to me. He was such a good man, and knowing his memory was protected, thank you for fighting for him when he couldn't fight for himself." I folded that letter and put it in my desk drawer, right next to the photo of Lewis and me at the Cubs game. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about setting the record straight, making sure the truth is told completely and accurately. Sometimes it's about protecting people who can't protect themselves, even if they're gone. The accounting floor was quieter now, more serious. Employees knew they were being watched, that someone was finally paying attention to the details that mattered. But it wasn't the paranoid quiet of fear, it was the respectful quiet of a workplace that had remembered its integrity. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another payroll cycle complete, every employee accounted for, every payment verified, every signature legitimate. No ghosts this time. Just honest work for honest pay. I closed my laptop and headed for the elevator. Sunday dinner with Mom was in an hour, and I'd promised to bring dessert. As I walked through the lobby, past the corporate photos and mission statements about family values and ethical practices, I thought about Martin's old office. They'd converted it into a break room for the warehouse staff, the real warehouse staff, the ones who actually showed up every day and earned their paychecks. Poetic justice, in its quiet way. The elevator arrived, and as the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. Not invisible anymore. Not the ghost in the machine. Just Daniel Reyes, keeper of honest records, guardian of fair payment, and brother to a man whose name would never be stolen again. The doors opened to the parking garage, and I stepped into the Chicago evening, breathing air that felt cleaner than it had in months. Behind me, Redwood Logistics hummed with legitimate business, real employees earning real money for real work. The way it should have been all along. And somewhere in Graceland Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read "Beloved Son and Brother," Luis Reyes rested in peace, his name finally clean again. Justice, I'd learned, doesn't always wear a cape or carry a sword. Sometimes it carries a calculator and a sharp eye for details others prefer to ignore. Sometimes it speaks softly and moves carefully, building cases like cathedrals, brick by brick, truth by truth, until the structure is so solid that no amount of charm or arrogance can tear it down. Martin had asked me once why I stayed late so often, why I cared so much about just numbers. I told him then that numbers don't lie, they just wait for someone honest enough to read them correctly. He'd laughed at that, the way bullies laugh at things they don't understand. He wasn't laughing anymore. As I drove home through the city streets, past the construction sites where Lewis used to work, past the restaurant where we'd celebrated his engagement, I felt something I hadn't experienced since his funeral: peace. Not because Martin was gone, but because I'd kept a promise I'd made at Lewis's graveside 3 years ago. I'd promised to look after our family, to protect his memory, to make sure his name was never dishonored. I'd kept that promise, even when I didn't know it was being tested. The quiet ones, the invisible ones, the people who show up and do the work without fanfare, we're not as powerless as the loud ones think. We just choose our battles carefully. And when we fight to win.